gonna have to tell me not to drive to the airport.
Put a sign on the fence.
I know.
You're in the wrong spot, Gene.
I know.
Energy though,
Oh my God.
Well, you've done it for how many years?
38 years, I forget.
that kind of energy too.
Jay,
Told you.
Nick,
Gene?
glad to be here. I made it.
That's good.
I hope Dan didn't go there too. I didn't tell him. So
Hey,
what
Nick.
happens if Dan's not?
I just missed a call 11 minutes ago from Dan Robinson, so I assume he maybe is late or,
Jeremy just came up and told me that he was running just a couple minutes late.
okay, fair
He's on
enough.
his way.
All right. Oh, this is tomorrow.
How did she take it? He said, I don't know, I didn't watch it.
Okay, son.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you? Good.
Good.
Thank
you. Yeah, we're gonna wait. This January weather is a little.
Yes, we're gonna wait, make sure he makes it.
Jeremy just told me that New York and Virginia won the Amazon sweepstakes. I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Did they split it up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazon split.
The key to the whole thing, when you look back on it, you see businesses will do this to, you know, local communities all the time, play them off against each other.
Right.
Jeff Bezos owns 3 houses. One of them is near where Amazon headquarters is now. The second one's in Washington, 15 minutes away from the Arlington headquarters. The other one's in Long Island, 15 minutes away from New York headquarters. So basically, he did all that negotiating, and what he did was pick places that were close and convenient for him.
So it's Arlington, Virginia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it won't be in DC. Good enough. He'd have to buy my university to get the land, to find enough land in DC, but it's in Arlington.
So when was that announced? Just today?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. I missed it.
It's costing taxpayer money $48,000 per job.
Yeah, and you know, if you just look at it and said, hey, the boss is gonna build a business close to where he lives, if he said that, he wouldn't got any of those leverage for those tax incentives at all.
Right.
But
Right.
Look how much money people spend just putting those applications together too.
Indianapolis should have given him a home.
Yeah, they knew they weren't in it.
No, I know.
They're not funded.
Right.
They were looking at the cost per resident as far as
That's pretty.
funding there, and we're
Yeah.
lagged so far behind.
yeah. Now, when you can buy half of Long Island, trying to get Bezos to buy a house on Geist Reservoir is a stretch.
I'd rather have a Top Golf anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
You know, your next project's to get an Olive Garden. Now that you've got a Texas
Have you seen the
Roadhouse.
Roadhouse?
Yeah.
It's going vertical.
Yeah.
My wife said last night, she goes, it looks small. I said, honey, it's a Texas Roadhouse. It ain't nothing small.
Yeah.
It always looks small when you see the footprint. It's like this Dunkin' Donuts up here.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't look very big, but I guarantee it'll be adequate.
Most places are. I mean, wow, there's more space than you'd think from the outside.
Yeah.
Though we own a house in Winona Lake. I don't know if you remember where we live. We live in Winona Lake, and our house is always smaller than it looks from the outside. Wow, not as much room as I thought there'd be. It was built up off the ground, so it was like a 5.5 foot high crawl space basement. So you didn't use that, so that was all gone. That wasn't real space.
Walk up into it.
Yeah.
just down there.
Yeah.
Gene, what do you know, buddy?
Hey, not too much.
Bill Lynn, pharmacist.
Yep, over there.
Not too much going on.
Who's that right to?
Been down to Louisville lately?
A couple of times, yeah, this last month.
Kids all right?
Everybody's doing fine.
Good.
Everybody's really
It's
doing
right across the
fine.
road. Yeah. Yeah, first moved here and bought that house.
Hi, Robbie.
It's okay.
Did Jeremy get your message?
Yes.
You're just fine.
You're fine.
3 minutes late.
Nothing too bad.
Okay, ready? Okay. We'll go ahead and call the November meeting of the Board of Aviation Commissioners of the City of Warsaw to order. You should all have received your documents. You may have some hard copies of documents in front of you. Should have received them that way or electronically. And on the agenda, after the call to order, the first matter is the approval of the minutes for the October 15th meeting.
They look okay to you. You're gonna have to okay because I wasn't here.
Yeah, they look okay. I make a motion to approve minutes of last.
I can second.
Yeah. That moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, saying nay. Motion carried. Next, claims. Nick, what in particular would you like to point out to us this lovely evening?
The only thing out of the ordinary that you guys will see, there's two. That is for Dalton's, the 1655. That was for the weed control spray that you had approved a couple months ago. We got that squeezed in between some rain. And then the industrial door of Northern Indiana. That is that company that we talked about at the beginning of the summer that we're going to be using now for hangar door maintenance at the airport. They actually came in for that $2,845.75. They not only serviced the Zimmer Biomet hangar doors, they also serviced all 8 of our T-hangar doors and the 5 overhead garage doors in our shop building, all for less than what we were paying for a quarterly maintenance for the Zimmer Biomet doors.
Wow.
So I think in the long term, it's going to be a cost saver, and I've heard nothing but positive things so far from our tenants who are using those doors.
Okay.
So fingers crossed, we'll have good luck moving forward with that.
Yeah, not particularly high total on claims this month.
No, pretty low. We did have a lot of jet fuel, as you guys can see, the 177, 288, 73. But other than that, just a pretty normal month.
Okay.
Unless you guys have specific questions.
What is Quill again?
Office supplies.
Okay.
It's
like a
it's
Staples.
Yeah, it's like a Staples. It's an online, like a Staples and Amazon. We order some of our office supplies from there.
Okay.
The reason that was a little higher, we had some furniture in our lounge area that was falling apart and just in disrepair. It was several years old, and they sell office and waiting room furniture. We were able to get some chairs and some sofas to replace that.
Okay, I make a motion to accept the claims as presented, especially the Ascent Aviation for $177,288.73, along with C&P Oil for $871.
So moved. Do I hear a second?
Comment.
Sure.
At the top of the page on the claims, it says for period, I think that's supposed to be 10-1, isn't it?
On the first page where it says vendor activity report?
Yes.
Yeah. Because I see the second page.
It's for,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's for the month of October.
I second with that noted.
Sure.
Okay.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion carried. Have some stuff. You to sign. Okay, Ken, we'll take you next.
Okay, in front of you have not only my one-page engineer's report, but then the following 2 pages are some notes from some conference call that we had on November 5th. Since we last met, we've had 2 conference calls with the FAA of various levels of personnel. The first one was held on October 19th, and it was a follow-up to a meeting that Nick had with some of the FAA people. And the purpose of it was to talk at a high level. One of the people that was on there was a lady named Sue Schock, who is very high up in the FAA region. Mayor Tolmer joined that call in as well too. And the discussion was very high level, just to discuss a path going forward as to how to move the program and break up the power lines, as we have talked about at the recent. I think the call went very well. I think Mayor and Nick both felt the same, that it was in a positive direction, and we were hearing the things that we wanted to hear, a willingness to work with us on how to keep moving. The second call was the one that was supposed to be more of a technical nature, which was going to be with the planners and the ADO people. It originally was scheduled for Thursday, November 1st, but about 20 to 30 minutes before the call, they canceled on us and said, we'll talk soon. We immediately got on the horn and got it rescheduled for November 5th. And we had about a 90-minute call then on November 5th, and that's what all the minutes are. But to hit the highlights, it confirmed that even though it's not in writing, the call, there was discussion that we are breaking the program up into 2 parts, as we told the board last month. First part is, of course, the lowering of the power lines for the purpose of removing the obstacles from the departure surface and getting back some of your restrictions that are on there. And then part 2 would be the recovery of the displaced threshold, which is the physical moving of the threshold and dealing with the road that has to happen in order to accommodate that. As the board's aware, we sent a justification document on the power lines on October 2nd, which has been received on October, I didn't have a date on here, but on October 25th, the FAA's environmental specialist, Bob Beauchamp, sent us an approval letter under the National Environmental Policy Act that they consider the power lines as categorically excluded and that no further review is required. So that's yet another approval that we need to keep that project moving. It is on the airport layout plan, the current existing one. However, they do want us to do the 3rd step, which is normally done during the design process, but they would like for us to go ahead and accelerate that and get that submitted now. And that is, they want us to airspace what the new power lines will look like. And the goal of that is to make sure that we are lowering it as low as possible so as to maximize the available length of the runway in the future. So we had promised to have that, and we're doing it what they call a pen and ink. They call it pen and ink because in the old days we used to get out red ink pens and straight edges and draw them on the plans and mail it in, but now we do it in electronically with CAD and things. And in this situation, we're just going to replace a whole sheet, and we're going to have that pen and ink submitted no later than Monday, with the showing the removal of the 2 structures and the installation of the newer ones at the lower lines. So we discussed that with them as well too. The second part of the conversation was more on the airport layout plan needs that need to be addressed in order to accommodate the displaced threshold, the recovery. But before we got to there, they asked us what our priorities were, and they asked us at both of these calls, what are your funding priorities? And she said, if you want to think about it, that's fine. Nick says, no, we don't need to think about it. Number 1 priority is lowering the power lines. Number 2 priority is the rehabilitation of runway 1836. And the 3rd priority is the recovery of the displaced threshold. And the preferred years was 2019, 2020, and 2021. And so we reiterated that at this second call as well. And so then we just had a lengthy discussion then about the steps that needed to happen. As you recall, we had submitted a draft airport layout plan in January. they've promised to get us comments on that by the end of November so that we could then turn those around and try to get a formal final ALP submitted before the end of the year. But that's the process that needs to happen for the threshold recovery in 2021. So it's not quite as rushed as the pen and ink process. And the other highlight that came out of it is as we told you before, they're saying, pick out your preferred alternative for the road. Don't give us 2 or 3 of them and wait and see which one flashes out in the environmental. They said, pick out the one you want, put it on the airport layout plan, and start doing the environmental on that. And then if something comes up that we have to come up with a different alternative, we'll deal with that during the environmental. Same conclusion. So I think the other thing that's happened since then too, on October 31st, we submitted the supplemental funding applications, which is the 100% funding applications for that additional $1 billion. We submitted it for the power line relocation to the tune of $6.3 million, and we submitted one for the rehabilitation of runway 1836 for $2.2 million. And those applications were only supposed to be for years 2019 and 2020, so that's what we left it at that. The good news is when the FAA did the reauthorization this time, or Congress did, they have included an additional $1 billion per year, which will provide some additional $4 billion potentially on these future years. But we have heard through various meetings that the FAA had over $7 billion of applications for this first $2 billion, or $1 billion, which has only got $800 million left. So we all realize that it is very competitive. The good news is that those decisions are not being made by the FAA as to who gets that money. It's the U.S. Department of Transportation, and we know some people that are on those subcommittees and playing a role in that department in Congress. So we think with some good help and some leverage, you might be able to look very good near the top. As a matter of fact, the FAA and NDOT were both very happy that we submitted those applications. I think they thought that that was a good opportunity, and that if they had a way to, they would push for that. But they were excited that we had submitted for both of those, and I think Nick's going to discuss a little bit of his conversation with Marcus Dial later on. So I'll let you read the rest of the notes and things. We were originally going to have a CIP meeting then with all the exact same people that were on that call 2 days later, and it was agreed that we were going to end up basically just repeating everything we had just said, and that making a trip down there for that probably was not going to be very fruitful. But we have talked about, after we get their comments on the ALP, that we will go to their office and go over those comments and have another CIP meeting, so to speak, and just solidify the funding needs and everything going forward.
And then to piggyback right along with what Ken has been, well, first off, any questions for Ken before I?
Got 3 of them. I want to work my way backwards up the line here.
Okay.
In terms of identification of the preferred alternative for what we do with the road, do we have clarity as to what that preferred alternative is as we sit here?
The tunnel.
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page, that
Absolutely.
we're talking about preferred alternative. That's what we were looking at.
And I was gonna talk about that. I'll go into more detail in a minute.
Okay, that was an easy one. Secondly, in terms of identifying the priority for power lines and then the runway rehab and threshold recovery, I know that's not a commitment to say, okay, well, just because we've identified that in 2019, that's when it's going to happen. But are we sitting here saying, well, there's a possibility that project could start before the end of next year?
The power lines?
Yes.
I think it's a possibility. It's going to depend on identifying the funding, because right now they don't have you in the hopper, so to speak, for discretionary funds, but that doesn't mean it can't. The good news about that other funding is the supplemental funds may fund a lot of other projects up the line ahead of you and pull them out of the queue, so to speak, so that you could possibly move in. And then if you do get awarded the supplemental funds, without a doubt, it could happen next grant cycle.
Okay.
So-
And then, I know happening at grant cycle, but does that mean actual work and we go out there and see things moving?
I have actually asked AEP to start preparing a draft of
Okay.
the next contract, because we need to work out the terms, because sometimes power companies want a lot of payments up front. FAA doesn't pay up front. They insist upon pay-as-you-go.
Yeah.
So we may have to confirm with them that they are okay with being backed up by a federal grant and paying as we go. So, and it's much higher than the guy we've been talking to as
Yeah.
well too. But a lot of times they'll ask for 40% at the very beginning, 40% somewhere else, and then 20% before they finish.
Okay.
So,
I just want to make sure we're and it's not using a shovel, but as shovel-ready as possible in terms of whether that funding, and wherever that funding might go, where we can say, okay, we can start now, because, again, the momentum is, once we actually start doing it, it's going to get finished.
that's why we've
By
asked
hook or
them
by
to go
crook.
ahead and prepare that agreement so that we can have that ready to go and work out the issues before we find out who gets terms.
Okay.
We're trying to be shovel-ready.
And third, my understanding of much of the reason to have that call was to make sure that everybody had clarity on some specific marching orders on what they needed to do, and then what needed to come back, and then what we needed to do. Are we confident that you have that clarity as to what needs to get done, you'll be able to get those things done? And are you confident the FAA has clarity and that they'll be able to get their side of this done?
Yes, because at the end of the call, we had an IOU, who owed who what, and what the next steps would be after that.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Would you
Okay,
just give me
that's
a
fine.
quick thumbnail on those two types of funding? I know the supplemental funding was fully reimbursed. We did get the application in a timely fashion for that, but you'd had some editorial comments on how those funds have already somewhat been appropriated.
They're all considered AIP funds, which is the Airport Improvement Program. They're all considered discretionary, but the FAA always gets about $3.2 billion a year for projects, and part of that's non-primary entitlement, part of it's discretionary, but that's what they usually get to dole out across all 50 states and things throughout the year. The supplemental funds is an additional $1 billion that Congress approved last year in 2018 with the additional appropriation, or I guess it was another. It was before the reauthorization. It was actually when they funded them through the end of 2018. They included an additional $1 billion of supplemental funds. So technically, in 2018, they had $4.2 billion, but $1 billion of that was to be funded over 2018, 2019, and 2020. So, but then the latest reauthorization that's happened since the fiscal year was what they call a 5-year reauthorization for the next 5 years. Now, it's just an authorization. It's not an appropriation. They still have to go through the appropriation bill every year. But it's going to include not only the 3.2 that they normally get, but an additional $1 billion a year that they can use to fund some of these, like what we call shovel-ready supplemental projects. And there are some airports that get priority treatment. The smaller airports in very rural areas that aren't part of a micropolitan or a metropolitan area. But everybody qualifies, but you have to compete for it. It was an online application. You couldn't put any attachments, but you had to describe your project and how you thought it was good and everything. And we actually have copied our friends in Congress with that application as well too, so they know what we're asking for. And if you get awarded that, you also don't have to come up with any matching funds. But it'll still be the same AIP grant like you're used to, but it will be a 100% grant with no state or no local matching funds.
That's why we're pushing so hard for the supplemental funds, and we'll be using, obviously, both sides of the house and the
Yeah, because
Congress.
5% of that's $300 grand alone.
But most projects are going to be looking at that for the exact same reason as well. And I
Oh, yeah.
thought you'd suggested that with those supplemental funds, that could draw some of those people out of the other funds. that then may open that up.
It could, because, for example, the first round, they funded $200 million worth of projects. Majority of them were large airports that had
Right.
commercial service. But like an airport in Alabama got $27 million for a taxiway project. Well, that took that out of the hopper for the regular discretionary funds. That it freed up money, so to speak.
So the timing, the fact that we got our application in by the end of October made us eligible for the supplemental funding round.
Yes.
And I assume that will be announced sometime soon.
Yeah, I think they'll announce it earlier, because the first round, they didn't announce it till September 21st, which, you know, the fiscal year ended on September 30th. But we think that the reason why they wanted those applications so early is so they could make earlier announcements. Because a lot of people scrambled and spent a lot of money to go out and get bids and have bids in hand to apply for those funds.
Right.
Only to Indiana not getting a penny.
Right, so then the discretionary funds, what's the timeline on that funding cycle?
Typically, we start hearing if they're fully authorized and appropriated, they usually will start awarding grants in April, May, June, July. But that's the one that normally goes all the way up till the end of September before they dole out the full amount.
Which leads me, unless there's more questions, leads me into the second part of this, which is the general service agreement, the task order 06 that Ken brought up at the last meeting we
Well,
tabled.
let me see if do you have any more questions before we go on to that? Any questions? Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're just fine. The reason that I feel this is so important that we approve this tonight and move forward with this, I had a conversation with Marcus Dial, who is our NDOT aviation planner for Warsaw. We had a very candid conversation a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Best case scenario, this very well may not happen, but best case scenario, Warsaw qualifies and receives the supplemental funding for the power line project next year. Fund the whole project, the 6.2 million, get the power lines lowered out of the way, we don't have to worry about it again. If we have a shovel-ready project, like a rehabilitation for runway 1836, that all we have to do is send this project to bid, receive the bids, open them, and we can start the project, there is the possibility that we could see both of those projects next year. If with the supplemental funding for the power lines, it would not cost, obviously, we would have a zero match on that, that's 100% FAA funded. The 2.2 million of the runway rehab, we would be responsible for 5%. The state would cover 5% and the FAA would cover 5%. So it would kind of call it double dipping, if you will, but by us being, if we would qualify for that supplemental funding, having this in hand, ready to go out to bid, the engineering for the project is already finished, the studies are finished. We've done most of this work this summer. We've done the boring samples, we've done a lot of the site surveying. We just need to finalize all of the actual CAD drawings and have those ready to go so that if best case scenario, we would have the option to use that as a second project next year. We have it ready to go. Worst case scenario, we don't get the power line project, we don't get supplemental, and it's not going to work out for our discretionary funds next year. Having this in hand, ready to go, we at least have one project that we can start moving forward while we still hash out the power line project. So I personally think this is something we really need to just talk strongly about.
Okay, so if we get this project done, which is basically have an NGC do all the preparatory drawings and engineering work and all that kind of stuff, so that's again, a shovel-ready project. Once that work's done, your work, that can sit on a shelf for a couple of years without any significant.
It'll get funded because the FAA already gave you a grant to pay for this. And they don't like for things to sit on the shelf too long because standards change, conditions change. So they usually like to see it constructed within 2 years anyway. But all Nick's thing is that the state is going to push to fund it possibly as early as this year as well too. And if not, we've at least got it in line for the 2019.
So we have a lot of confidence for the next 2 fiscal years that it's gonna get, not just the drawings, but the rehabilitation projects will get done.
Yes.
Yeah, because your pavement is in that
Yeah,
shape that it needs to be done.
yeah. Okay. Questions?
Yeah.
And we would, if no questions, then we probably need to entertain a motion to approve task order 6.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion to approve task order 06 for
Been moved.
NGC.
Been moved and seconded to approve task order 6 with NGC. Any further questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carried.
Thank you.
I'm
Well,
gonna,
I'll bet I gotta sign something before I
There's-
leave, right?
there's 3 of them.
Yeah, I got this part figured out, yeah. Okay. Ken, do you have anything else for us
No, I
today?
don't. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ken? Okay, thank you. Nick, go ahead.
Right. Moving on to new business, hangar 18, E, or excuse me, G, sorry. In January of 2017, I brought this to the board. The tenant, James Oosley, had not paid their rent in a couple months. And again, we are back to that tenant not having paid the last few months. And I'm just, we went our 90 days, and I was just bringing it to the board. Jay, we had originally sent this letter back in January of 2017, as the board sent that, requesting everything be paid in full. And I'm just bringing this back to the board. Would we like to move forward looking at evicting this tenant, or would we like to try and work things out and get them, their account brought back in? I just need the oversight of the board on that.
How long has this person had that hangar? And where is 18G?
18G is one of our hangars that we own. It is one of our T hangars.
On the east row, south of,
Yes, of air care.
Air Care?
Yeah. They've been there since before I've been since I've been the manager. And it seems like this year, they'll come in and they might pay 3 months up front, and then they've been right on time, and then we're back down to, we're 90 days out. We tried calling the phone number that we have for that account. It's been disconnected, and they are not responding to the letters that we're sending out with the invoices, so.
Is there an airplane in the hangar?
The last time I looked, there was not.
So he's really not using it. I'm kind of leaning towards sending him an eviction notice.
What do you think, Gene?
Yeah, if there's no action and he doesn't have an aircraft in there, he's not doing anything with it, I think we proceed.
Yeah.
Ken was just asking if we had a waiting list. Currently, we do not. We have, we'll be talking about a potential new hangar if you guys approve the lease tonight. We currently don't have a tenant looking to rent the space. I will say about 3 months ago, one of our tenants moved out of the area, and their aircraft obviously moved, and that hangar has not been rented since, but we've actually rented it a couple times overnight to just transient pilots who want to keep it in. There's gonna be an airplane in it tomorrow for the next couple days, so it's nice to have at least one hangar for small aircraft to be able to be stored in. But obviously, we'll send out flyers and announcements if we do move forward with eviction, that we do have hangar space available at the airport.
Okay, and do you want to?
And maybe if you send the eviction notice, he'll come in and pay. Who knows?
Yeah. Is that all you want to have authorized Nick to do right now, just to send him a notice of eviction?
What's our other option?
Well, you can always say, okay, eviction notice, and he doesn't get out, you refer it to legal counsel. You could take that step now, or you could hold on to it.
I think we hold on to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so is that a motion to for Nick to direct an eviction notice? And
Unless the account is paid.
yes.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Send an eviction notice.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carried. And I tell you, the reason I was very specific in how I worded that is because as we deal with things from here on out, as you may know, one of my partners is the new city attorney for the city of Warsaw. And as work, if and when the board is referring or considering referral of work for legal counsel, those will be issues in which I will have to abstain. I will not be able to make, to vote on those kind of things. So, just so you all are aware of that. Sorry?
Not so fast. I'm good till 12:31.
I know, go ahead. You're still here, that's correct. But the practical matter thing, Mike, is if I know it's something that's gonna last after December 31st.
That transition's being made right now.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, I just, since the issue kind of came up, I wanted to make sure that I had that on the record and that everybody understood that, so.
Okay.
Okay, next, what else you got, Nick?
Number 2, Hangar 35 land lease. I've been approached by 2 gentlemen, Corey Johnson and Craig, I'm gonna butcher his last name, Rossavir. They own an aircraft that is currently based in Ohio, and they're having to drive to Ohio. One of the gentlemen lives up in the Wawasee area, the other one, I'm actually not sure exactly, but he's within about half an hour of Warsaw. They would like to base the aircraft at Warsaw. They both like our facilities. And if you guys approve this lease tonight, a few years back, we've had a new row of hangars built on the north side of the airport. And this hangar would be the next one in line. They are actually proposing to build an 80 by 80 hangar with a 55-foot wide door, roughly 20 feet tall. So it's going to be a substantial hangar up there. They're starting with 1 aircraft, and they're already talking about a second or possibly a third one moving in. So I think it would be a great addition to the airport. We would just need to approve this land lease. Their land lease would be this lease would carry them through December 31 of 2029, and it would be for $750 a year.
And where is this gonna be again?
On the north side of the airport, there's the 3 taxiways.
Yeah.
And they would just be the next one down in the middle taxiway.
Okay. We're kind of extending out in that same direction where the other ones are out there, the relatively new ones, right?
Well, yeah, I'll pull it up for you.
Does this start a third row, or is this
This would be a
continuing north?
continuing of the second row
Okay.
that we've had 3 hangars built on that row to date.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, so, okay.
And these 3 hangars here, and it would be the next continuation here. The reason for the 80 feet between those taxiways, the taxiway object-free area is 80 feet in between the 2 areas. So that is the deepest hangar that they can build, and then the 80 feet wide, that's what they're proposing. So.
And when you talk about adding another maybe another airplane or 2, that's within the footprint of what they're leasing already.
Correct.
That's not,
Yeah.
gee, we'd have to come back here for later, that's, gee, this is what we're doing now.
They're building the hangar to what they are thinking they will need in the
Gotcha.
future. Correct.
Okay.
And you'll need us to do the little
Yeah, once-
description and the airspace for you.
This is just the lease. They are still working with an architect for final building designs and drawings. Once that has happened, it's got to go to Ken for airspacing. It has to go to the state for the plan release through the state. There's a whole process. This is just the first step for them to start that building process.
Okay.
All right. Need a motion on
We
that?
need a motion.
I make the motion to approve that.
We have a motion to approve the land lease.
Land lease.
Craig Wasserwer and Corey Johnson. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion carried.
All right.
Copies of the last page of the lease are coming down to the board to sign.
Last
Is this where Moore's Quotes comes in?
It is, Moore's
Okay.
Quotes is coming in here. So I have been working with Moore's on a track loader for the airport for both snow removal and then basically a fork truck for us to be able to move heavy objects around the airport that are on pallets. Before you, I have three different quotes and different options for the board to consider as far as a skid steer is concerned. We have used Moores in the past solely because of their maintenance agreement that they have with us right now. We currently purchase our lawn mowing equipment through Moores, and if we ever have a piece of equipment break down, they will have a loaner piece of equipment to us within 2 hours while they are working on the equipment that is broken down for us to use free of use. So that is great for us as an airport who has limited equipment to be able to have a loaner that our downtime is very limited. The different options that I'm bringing before the board tonight, the first one is if we were to take out a loan on that piece of equipment, there are three different options for financing: a 48, a 60, and a 72-month option. I am proposing that we do trade in our old John Deere tractor as well as our John Deere Batwing. We do not use those pieces of equipment. We have another tractor and Batwing that we use for our mowing. This tractor has a bucket on the front, but the hydraulic system just does not have the strength anymore to do what we need it to do at the airport. They are giving us $19,000 between those two pieces of equipment for trade-in. The second option that you guys will see is a lease to own, where there are 4 different options between 24, 36, 48, and 60 months. And you pay that amount as you see written there for the 24 to 60 month period, and then at the end of that period, we can purchase that piece of equipment for $100. And then the last quote that you guys see is actually the one that I'm personally leaning toward, but I'm bringing it to you guys. It is a cash purchase, but because of that, we qualify for municipal cash discount pricing through the NJPA program, and that lowers the price of the skid steer itself from $68,700 down to $60,600. With our trade-in allowance on that, that brings us down to roughly $41,000 for that piece of equipment. And that's just a great deal, and then we'll hopefully get that piece of equipment in on a cycle program like the city is moving towards, to move that equipment in and out so we don't have these large expenses, every 10 or 12 years when the equipment is worn out.
Okay, so you're talking about 3 different scenarios, one which is we lease and pay fair market value at the end. Second of all is we lease and we pay a token amount at the end. And third is we just pay cash.
Correct.
And I'm going to tell you, I don't like we pay fair market value at the end. So I would consider taking that off the table.
Okay.
How are we on cash? I mean, are we able to do this? And
yeah, we had been budgeting for this. I actually did not expect them to give us as much for the tractor and the Batwing as they are giving us in trade-in. We were budgeting about $50,000 for this piece of equipment. That $60,600 does not include any of the different attachments. You'll see on that quote the attachments are all priced out separately, and then those are just to show some of the different things that we can do with that, from a snow blower to a snow sweeper, pallet forks, snow buckets to move snow around. There's lots of different things that we will be able to do with that piece of equipment once we have it here. So just purchasing the equipment for the $41,000 and then moving forward, we'll be able to add to that piece of equipment as we need to. As we rotate the track loader in and out, we will most likely retain the attachments. Those will not, those don't get the same type of wear and tear that the actual machine does. And those will be on a different lifespan and a life cycle than the actual equipment will be. So my recommendation is that we look at the cash purchase through NJPA pricing. That is the NJPA is the National Joint Powers Associates that go out and they do government pricing for different pieces of equipment nationwide, and that is the best deal that we are going to get, in my opinion, through purchasing that piece of equipment. The other thing to note is this does have the high flow hydraulics, so we will be able to accommodate larger snow blowers, larger snow brooms, things like that, that will take a larger hydraulic pump than a normal apparatus would.
So, Nick, this price on this cash price is through the national?
Through NJP.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other reason that I really feel strongly for the Kubotas, specifically the SVL 95s, it's the exact same piece of equipment that the street department uses. So if there is a case where we need to share equipment back and forth, share attachments back and forth, their equipment will bolt directly to what we have, our equipment will bolt directly to what they have, and we'll be able to share those resources back and forth with